One mechanic, one wrong bolt, and 20 minutes later, a pilot was hanging outside his own plane at 17,000 feet.
First, subscribe to support the channel.
June 10th, 1990, Birmingham, England. British Airways Flight 5390 climbs into a perfect morning sky, heading for Spain. 81 passengers, breakfast carts rolling, seatbelt signs off. In the cockpit, Captain Tim Lancaster does the same thing thousands of pilots do on a calm climb. He loosens his shoulder harness, relaxes. He has no idea that decision is about to nearly kill him. Because 27 hours earlier, in a dark hangar, a maintenance manager had replaced the left cockpit windscreen. He was in a hurry, short-staffed, working alone at night. He needed 90 bolts to hold that windscreen against the sky, so he went to the parts carousel and matched the new bolts to the old ones by eye. That was the mistake. The bolts he grabbed looked identical, but they were a fraction of a millimeter too thin, less than the width of a human hair. 84 of the 90 bolts holding that windscreen were wrong. And here's a design flaw that made it lethal. On this aircraft, the windscreen was bolted on from the outside, which means cabin pressure wasn't pushing it into its frame, it was pushing it out, fighting those undersized bolts with every foot of altitude. At 17,300 feet, the bolts lost. Bang! The windscreen didn't crack. It disappeared, fired into the sky like a champagne cork. And in that instant, the cockpit became a vacuum chamber. Everything not bolted down rushed toward the hole, including Captain Lancaster. With his harness loose, the decompression ripped him out of his seat and sucked him headfirst through the window frame. His body slammed backward onto the roof of the aircraft, 400 miles per hour of freezing wind pinning him against the metal. The only things keeping him from vanishing into the sky were his legs snagged on the control column, and that created a second disaster. His legs had shoved the controls forward, pitching the plane into a dive, straight down, toward one of the busiest airspaces in Europe. Now here's where one man's reflexes saved 81 lives. Flight attendant Nigel Ogden was stepping into the cockpit at that exact second. The blast nearly took him too, but through the chaos, the fog, the screaming wind, he saw his captain's legs disappearing through the window, and he lunged. He wrapped his arms around Lancaster's waist and held on, while the dive pressed him into the floor and the -17-degree wind blast tore at his arms. And the right seat, co-pilot Alistair Acheson, was fighting his own war, papers whirling, instruments screaming, the cockpit door blown off its hinges onto the console. He grabbed the controls, pulled the plane out of its dive, and dropped toward thicker air. But he had a problem no simulator ever trained him for. He couldn't hear air traffic control. The wind was that loud. He was flying a crippled jet, blind to instructions, with his captain's body flailing against the fuselage. And inside the cabin, something even darker was happening. Nigel's grip was failing. Frostbite was eating his hands. Another crew member strapped himself into the pilot's seat and grabbed Lancaster's ankles. And at some point, looking at the captain's motionless body, face smashing against the side window, eyes open, unblinking, the crew reached a horrible conclusion. He's dead. We're holding a dead man. Someone said it out loud. Why not let go? But Nigel refused, and his reason had nothing to do with hope. If they released the body, it could whip backward, straight into the left engine. A corpse in the turbine would bring the whole aircraft down. So they held their dead captain to save everyone else for 20 minutes. At 7:33 a.m., Acheson did the impossible, landed the wounded jet smoothly at Southampton. Fire crews swarmed the runway, reaching up for the body draped across the nose. And that's when Captain Tim Lancaster moved. He was alive, 20 minutes outside a jet at 400 miles per hour in freezing air thin enough to knock a man unconscious, and he survived it. Frostbite, a shattered arm, broken thumb, wrist, ribs, nothing that couldn't heal. The investigation traced everything back to that night shift. One tired manager, one dim hangar, bolts matched by eye instead of by the book. A difference of 0.026 inches nearly erased 87 people. But here's the ending nobody expects. 5 months later, Tim Lancaster walked back into a cockpit and flew again. And Nigel Ogden, the man whose arms held a dead captain over the English countryside, he said he'd never forgiven himself for letting go. His shoulder never fully recovered. He kept it as a souvenir.